Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Alliance Against Violence and Adversity webinar series. Today is an important webinar as part of the Webinar Wednesday series, and I am your host, Jason Novick, a webinar coordinator at the University of Calgary. And thank you so much for joining us today. There are a couple of procedural things before we begin. First, this webinar is being recorded and will subsequently be made available on Ava's YouTube channel for viewing. And also throughout the presentation, please use the question and answer function to pose questions to our speakers, and we will make time to discuss after their main presentation at the end of this webinar. On a national level, we encourage all Canadians and visitors to Canada to learn about the Indigenous peoples of the lands on which we live, work, and visit, and also to become engaged allies together. And we as Canadians, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, respect the self-determination of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and their rights and responsibilities in cultures, languages, and the pursuit of wellness. So the title of today's webinar is the Atlas Institute's Co-Design Resources on Intimate Partner Violence for Veterans and Veteran Family Members. And I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. And we have the following presenters. So first, Petra Babic is a certified life coach, peer support facilitator, and advocate with over 15 years of experience helping women through life transitions. As an ex-veteran wife, she understands the unique challenges of military families. She has served as an advisory member for the Atlas Institute's IPV Resources Project and supports research to improve IPV services. Her advocacy also addresses single parenting, the long-term effects on children, operational stress injuries, codependency, social support, and the need for greater recognition of ex-spouses in the veteran family system. Victoria Carmichael is a senior knowledge mobilization specialist at the Atlas Institute. In this role, she collaborates closely with veterans, family members, service providers, and researchers to share knowledge in meaningful and accessible ways. Victoria's background encompasses research, community engagement, and project management with a focus on stigma, violence prevention, and suicide prevention. And she holds a Master's of Science in Evidence-Based Social Intervention and Policy Evaluation from the University of Oxford. Robin Dziekan is a stakeholder engagement professional working for the Atlas Institute. She has a BA in psychology from the University of Ottawa. She's the daughter of two Canadian Armed Forces veterans, and as such, working for a not-for-profit focused on improving the mental health and well-beings of veterans and their families is a great personal importance to her. Robin has been working within the field of stakeholder engagement for the past 7 years, and during this time, she has ensured a variety of stakeholder perspectives to be included in projects ranging from healthcare standards to knowledge mobilization resources. Kaitlyn LaRiviere is a registered social worker and counselor with over 9 years of experience supporting military and veteran families through the Military Family Resource Center. She offers compassionate, trauma-informed support for navigating transitions, trauma, and family challenges with specialized training from the When Love Hurts program and the Battered Women's Support Services. With a deep understanding of military community stressors, Kaitlyn is committed to fostering resilience, safety, and healing. And last but not least, Ashlee Mulligan is the Director of Partnerships of Stakeholder Engagement at the Atlas Institute, where she works to promote engagement, collaboration, and knowledge exchange in view of foundationally embedding the lived experience and expertise of veterans and veterans' families in the networks we are building and the work we do. Ashlee has a Master of Science with a specialization in neuroscience and a background in women's studies and psychology. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. I'm incredibly excited for your talk, and now I'll hand it over to all of you.
Thank you so much, Jason. Those were a lot of bios to get through, but I just want to acknowledge the incredible team at Atlas who put this together and our incredible co-presenters, Kaitlyn and Petra today, who are phenomenal additions to this project, if you will. We'll get in a bit to the collaboration we've been through, but just want to thank everybody, both on the presenter side, but also on your side within ABA for hosting us today. So we're happy to be with you today to share the resources that the Atlas Institute has developed for veterans and family members who've been impacted by intimate partner violence. We'll begin with a brief overview of the Atlas Institute, and then we'll go into a bit about IPV in military and veteran families, followed by a description of the work on the IPV resources. We'll also walk through our suite of resources in more detail and briefly showcase some other relevant resources before going into a question and answer period. Before we get started with our presentation, we'll start by acknowledging that the Atlas Institute for Veterans and Families is located in Ottawa on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. And we typically within Atlas invite folks to share in the chat the traditional territory from which they're joining from. So if that's a practice that you'd be open to, we do invite folks to do that today. We also wish to acknowledge the service and sacrifices of all Canadian Armed Forces veterans and former serving RCMP members, as well as their families. The courage and commitment of veterans has protected our nation, as well as countless others around the world. We thank veterans and families for their contribution to our country. Just a brief content warning that this webinar includes content on intimate partner violence. It might be difficult to listen to and may bring up a range of emotions, and we do encourage you to care for your safety and well-being. So through years of advocacy and work as veterans and family members ourselves within the organization, we identified some high-level needs that weren't being met. So these included more appropriate services, more research, more useful and usable information, and more connection between people. So the Atlas Institute exists to strengthen mental health services by addressing these gaps. Our mandate is federal, so we work across Canada. Everything that we do at Atlas has CAF and RCMP veterans and families in mind as the people who need to benefit from our work. Robin, go ahead to the next slide, if you will. So we do this through 5 main functions that you see on your screen. So first off, we develop resources to educate and inform. That's a bit what we're here to talk about today, but we want to ensure that the information and knowledge that we create is accessible and useful to veterans and families and those who support them. Second, we coach and train service providers who work with veterans and families to provide more tailored services. For example, we work to increase their understanding of military and RCMP cultures and contexts so that they can be more aware of possible adaptations and familiar with their unique needs. Next, we bring stakeholders together from across the country and internationally to share knowledge and advance trauma-informed practice. And our goal really is to help break down silos and create more connections. We also conduct and fund research in areas that are important to veterans and families so that we have more evidence-informed knowledge available at the systems level. And finally, we provide expert opinion and insights on veterans and families' mental health in the form of policy briefs and through consultations with policymakers to influence public policies grounded in evidence. So just to note, we're not a service provider. What we do is we work to strengthen the mental health system to improve service provision for veterans and families and empower veterans and families directly with information and knowledge. So why are we here today as a veteran and family mental health organization talking about intimate partner violence? I'd just like to provide a little bit of context about why our organization has done work in this area. So from the beginning, in terms of Atlas's inception about 5 years ago, we noticed that there's very limited research in intimate partner violence in Canada related to veterans and families. Most of what we know actually comes from studies conducted outside of Canada. There are 2 major reviews that were published in 2022 that give us some important context about this population. So these review studies suggest that about 1 in 8 veterans and active duty personnel report recently using abuse, and 1 in 5 report recently experiencing abuse. Most existing interventions focus on responding to IPV when it happens, rather than preventing it before it begins. And so this shows a real gap. Other research beyond these 2 reviews tells us that there are some unique factors linked to military service and transition to civilian life that can increase the risk of IPV and make it more challenging. Next slide, but I was about to talk about a study We partnered on a Canadian study looking at direct experiences of intimate partner violence in military and veteran families. And within the study, participants described coercive control, violence involving weapons, and sexual violence. They also pointed to specific military, cultural, and organizational factors that may increase risk. Importantly, participants noted a reluctance among military leaders and organizations to recognize and address IPV, which can be a major barrier to change. So we know from other research on IPV in military and veteran families that certain factors can actually increase risk of IPV and hinder getting help in veteran families. So research shows that there are some unique factors linked to military service culture and the transition to civilian life that can increase the risk of IPV. For example, exposure to trauma and high stress environments that can affect how people cope with conflict at home. Leaving the military can come with challenges around identity, roles and relationships, employment and finances, which can increase family stress. Military culture can sometimes transfer into the home. So for example, strict hierarchies, rigid authority, and sometimes violence being accepted or viewed as normal. And likewise, there might be power imbalances within the home. The military profession is often idealized, and partners may be financially or socially dependent, which can shift power dynamics. And all of these can interact and heighten risk of IPV. In addition, there are many barriers that can make getting help difficult, especially for veterans and their families. Some of these overlap with the civilian population, like stigma, shame, fear, and judgment. But in the veteran families, there are some unique layers. For example, fear of career impact. So for example, disclosing IPV could affect their reputation, promotion, or ability to serve, for example. Lack of awareness. People may not know what services exist in their area, especially if they've recently relocated as part of their service. Geographic isolation. Many veteran families live in rural or remote areas where specialized supports might not be available, and cultural awareness gaps. So service providers might not always understand or get the veteran experience, which can discourage people from getting help. So I wanted to share all that to lay a bit of context about who Atlas is and why we embarked on doing work in this area. I'll now turn it over to Robin to talk about where we started with some of this work.
Yeah, thank you, Ashlee. So, as you just saw, a lot of what we know about intimate partner violence in veteran families comes from very few limited research studies. But together, this research does suggest that intimate partner violence is not only an issue facing veterans' families that has serious impacts, but also more can be done to prevent and respond to IPV, whether through training of service providers or supports for veterans and their families. Early in Atlas's mandate, we conducted a series of consultations with community members, including a needs assessment, which identified that there was a gap in informative and practical resources to support veteran families. As a result of what we learned from the consultations, partnered with what we could gather from the research, we committed to developing resources on IPV specific to veteran families. This veteran-centric approach is especially needed given that civilian resources may not properly fit or reflect the veteran family needs, realities, or experiences. Our approach to developing these resources was phased, trying to maintain a focus on improving awareness, knowledge, and capacity throughout those phases. The first phase of resource development work was completed in 2023, and that focused on the development of resources to build foundational awareness of the issue within this community and included 2 videos as well as a service directory. The second phase of the work wrapped up earlier this year, focusing on developing practical guides for to build capacity in veterans and family members through strengthening knowledge and awareness of support tools, strategies, and services. To develop these resources, we used an engagement approach known as co-design, which involves bringing together lived and learned expertise and combining that with what we know from existing and emerging evidence to create the products or outputs. More specifically, The co-design approach that we used for both phases of this resource development brought together a variety of perspectives. We began by recruiting and assembling the advisory committee of those diverse perspectives, where we cast a fairly wide net as part of our recruitment to help ensure as much diversity of expertise and experiences and perspectives were reflected. This group that we ended up assembling included family members, veterans, service providers, and other subject matter experts like researchers. Once we had the group assembled, we met monthly over the course of 9 months, where each meeting we facilitated a different discussion to help inform the resources that we were developing together. Some of these discussions included early on discussing what resources do the advisory wish they had that had existed for them or for their clients. This helped us to create a list of potential topics and outlines for resources that we could develop that could respond to the needs of the community. Once we had narrowed down topics, we worked with the advisory to determine what content should be included and how it should be framed. This helped to ensure that what we ended up sharing in the resources was easy to understand, relevant, and meaningful. We also got their input on what the resources should look like. And to do this, we hired an external graphic designer who worked closely with the advisory committee to ensure the design of the resources, from the colors to the imagery and illustrations, were accurate, accessible, and sensitive to the needs and experiences of those impacted by IPV. Finally, once we had the resources ready to go, we got the advisory's input on how to best share the resources, from specific organizations that we should be sure to share copies with, to the wording that should be used in our social media posts to help encourage uptake. And all of this was done to ensure that the resources would ultimately get to the hands of the people who need it and would resonate with them. At each stage in the process, the input of the advisory was combined with the feedback from Atlas staff members, other subject matter experts, as well as the evidence from existing and new research, best practices, and standards. And we would typically default to a majority preference approach for decision making, where if there was a difference of opinion, we'd strike to find a middle ground to balance out opinions or preferences when those arose. But now I'd like to turn it over to Kaitlyn and Petra, who were two members of our advisory committee, to share about their experiences being involved in the co-design process and how that impacted them. I'll turn it over to you first, Kaitlyn.
Hello, my name is Kaitlyn LaRiviere, and I am a social worker and counselor at the Military Family Resource Center in Esquimalt, BC, post-colonial known as Victoria, BC. To give you that little refresher that my perspective on the advisory community came from a service provider, and knowing the importance of having quality, tangible resources to give clients when I work with them on a daily basis was my main motivation in joining the advisory committee. And this is the first time that I've been on a committee that's been able to create a resource, and I've seen it happen from the very beginning, the brainstorming process, all the way to the end result. So it was a wonderful experience to be a part of. And what I appreciated about it, it was a collaborative group process. So there were a variety of different people from a variety of different backgrounds with different professional and personal experiences related to IPV. But one thing we all had in common is we are all very passionate about creating something meaningful for the military and veteran community to support them with their experience of IPV. As Robin mentioned, some of the most richest conversations came out of when all of us didn't necessarily agree on a certain topic. And we were able to really practice empathy with other people's experiences. And I think that really highlights the nuance of intimate partner violence and how it's kind of impossible to create a one size fits all, but it's the most value comes out of those types of conversations and seeing how many different perspectives that we can provide in one resource. The process didn't feel rushed. It took us about 9 months, which allowed for adequate research and reflection time and the opportunity to contribute in a variety of different ways. So we would meet in a virtual meeting room, and then there would be emails sent out and an opportunity to reflect to ensure that the resource was very intentional. And personally and professionally, it was a call to action for me to support people who are living with intimate partner violence. So as a social worker, I'm used to handing out resources to people that I work with all the time. And this gave me the opportunity to be able to hand something to someone who, may be in a very stressful or vulnerable position, but have the pride behind knowing that I was part of creating something that was very accessible and intentional for them. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Petra, Petra Babic, and I have a multitude of hats that I wear, but I think the one that I'm most proud of is, well, one, mom, and two is an advocate for individuals who've gone through the IPV experience. One of the major parts of me wanting to be on this committee, and I'm super proud of being on this committee with Atlas. I've done various different projects with various different organizations, and I can honestly say doing this with this group of individuals through Atlas was probably one of the best experiences I've ever had, considering I come at this with the lived experience, which is not easy. This committee consisted of not just professionals, but it was veterans, family members, and individuals with the lived experience, which that I really appreciated. Because when it comes to this topic, you can't learn everything you need to know just from books. You need those individuals who've lived through it to lend their voice to this type of work. And it was a great experience that they created an environment where you can say what you needed to say. There was no judgment. It was a safe space. At no point did I ever feel that I was being judged or I was saying the wrong thing, or if something was coming out right, they all knew where I was coming from, and somebody else would maybe jump in and say something to the same effect. And like they just understood me, and that I really appreciated, because you don't always get that coming from my experience. We went through a lot of tough conversations. I know myself was triggered quite a few times, and it was fantastic how everybody dealt with it, and we got through it. And if there were changes that needed to be made, there was no questions. It was like, okay, we could do these changes. Just, how can we word it, or how can we do it? And it was fantastic. I didn't feel anybody was just sitting there, checking off boxes as I was speaking or somebody else was speaking. Everybody was actually listening, and people were empathetic, and they genuinely cared, and a lot of heart and soul went into this project, this resource, and I really appreciated this collaboration. It's powerful, and I feel what we created is going to make a big difference, because IPV is not an easy topic, and then IPV within the military family and sort of environment is an extra difficult, sort of unique topic in itself. So I really appreciated everybody that came out and worked together, and we all got through it and created something that I feel would make a huge, huge difference in the lives of individuals that need it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Petra and Kaitlyn, for sharing your perspectives on the co-design process. It was equally wonderful to work with you both. And now, later we're going to hear a little bit more about what you folks think of the value. But before we do that, I'm just going to walk through some of the IPV resources that we created, both in the first round as well as more recently, as well as how they might be used. So our first suite of resources were 2 videos, and as Robin said, they're short animated videos, and they were really developed to help veterans and family members learn more about intimate partner violence. And service providers can make use of these resources to help understand context around their care, as well as veteran families may find it helpful even to share these resources with their service providers, again, for that contextual understanding of experiences. So the first video really provides an overview of some common types of intimate partner violence, specifically physical violence, sexual violence, as well as psychological aggression. And this can really help people recognize if they or someone that they care about may be experiencing abuse. And then the second video goes into more detail about different factors that might exist specifically within the military, veteran, and family communities that can really make it more difficult for folks who are experiencing abuse to get help when they need it. So those are some of those factors that Ashlee had described earlier on, like stigma or the transfer of violence into the home. This next set of resources that we're going to walk through are the guides. So those are the 2 practical ones. And this is what we'll probably spend most of our time on discussing. And these can be really used. They're intended for veterans and family members to learn more about intimate partner violence, but likewise, service providers may also find them helpful to either share with their clients or just learn a little bit more about the veteran and family experiences related to intimate partner violence. And so the first guide includes information on how to recognize signs of an unhealthy or abusive relationship and what to do if you find yourself in that situation. So inside the resource, it's split into kind of 2 main parts. The first part is all about understanding what IPV is, why it occurs, how to recognize an unhealthy or abusive relationship, things like key terminology and statistics. And then it also describes different forms and types of abuse. It explains different risk factors that might exist. And then it also has a whole section on dispelling common myths. And within that first part, there's a section that we explicitly worked with our advisory group to craft, which explores the complex relationship between post-traumatic stress disorder and intimate partner violence and outlines some of those key signs to look out for. The second part then focuses on the what now question or addressing unhealthy and abusive relationships. So it details the benefits of getting help, as well as outlines various support and treatment options, both for those experiencing abuse, as well as those engaging or perpetrating abusive behaviors. The second guide is all information for parents and caregivers to help better understand the effects of intimate partner violence in the home on children and really how to support them. So inside, much like the first guide, you'll find a lot of facts and definitions about childhood exposure to intimate partner violence. There's a little bit about short and long-term impacts. So how this experience of witnessing or seeing abuse can affect their thoughts and feelings and behaviors. And then there's another myths and realities section. There's also an entire section devoted to trauma-informed strategy for supporting children. So things like tips for having age-appropriate conversations, some key messages to share, and then a whole sample conversation guide or starters to get started on that difficult conversation. And then the end of the resource has a curated list of specific services and supports and things like books or websites for children and youth that they can use to learn more about mental health, but also about intimate partner violence more broadly. And now I wanted to turn it back to Kaitlyn and Petra to share about the value of these guides and how they might be used. And maybe we'll start with Petra and what you think.
I feel these resources fill a gap that has existed for a long time. There hasn't been, as Ashlee had mentioned, there hasn't been much research or guidance specific to Canadian veteran and military families facing intimate partner violence. And that in itself leaves many people feeling isolated and unseen. The guide helps shine a light on the unique risk factors, things like frequent relocation, transition stress, and impacts of trauma. That in itself, those unique circumstances can make it extra hard to recognize abuse and reach out for help. The value of the work is that it gives both veterans and their families practical tools what to look for, where to go, the language to name what's happening, because not everybody always recognizes what is actually going on. And it can help disrupt the abuse before it escalates or it gets to a point where there's, no return. It can help connect people with support and give families the confidence to know that they're not alone, because oftentimes in these situations, that's exactly what we feel: alone. There's nobody else going through this. Nobody's going to understand. So this resource is it's going to help open doors for conversations that, too often it's silenced in this community, to move from, getting the help and not just, going from surviving, but to healing, getting the help and healing. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Petra. And I wanted to just highlight that a common misconception of the military culture is that it's a very resource-rich community and that military and veteran families have access to a whole bunch of military and veteran specific resources. And that's not quite true, although there are some specific resources that are available. Lots of times at the military family resource centers, we're referring people out into the community. And so having these guides as something that we can provide to community partners who are already, extremely overworked, that can give them a glimpse of some of the unique aspects of military and veteran lifestyle. So when those clients walk through their door, they at least have a frame of reference. I think that that's really important. Another piece that I think the guides will do a great job of is being applicable when people are isolated. So if we think of a unique aspect of military lifestyle, it's very common for people to be relocating every 2 to 3 years for their job. And where they're living is usually not in the same region that they grew up or where they have family supports. Most people say, if I move every 2 years, it's really hard to create that community support. So isolation is a big factor, and we know that it's a big risk factor for IPV. So having these guides as something that they can grab either online or a physical copy that will provide them with concise information and hopefully let them know that they're not alone in their experience, because it takes a lot of vulnerability to talk about this with family, friends, and service providers. The importance of having resources that reflect the unique aspect of military and veteran lifestyle as it pertains to IPV. So might come as a shocker, but one of the reasons why I am a social worker and counselor is I love talking with people about feelings. So some of the big feelings that have come up with people I've talked to about IPV are fear and overwhelm, uncertainty, and doubt. So fear, which if you think of the reality of the military culture, I think Ashlee was talking a little bit about this earlier. If someone was to come forward and express concerns about intimate partner violence within their family to, say, a chaplain within the military system, there is a chance that that information could be shared with the chain of command, and it could be shared with their partner's employer, their partner's boss. It could impact their job. It could impact whether they're up for promotion and therefore their family's financial situation. So there's lots of risk associated with reaching out for support, and fear then that comes with that too. And then the lack of accessibility to accurate information and preconceived notions about IPV within the military culture. Some of the most common concerns, or the most common concern that I run into with families that I work with, is they're worried about how their unhealthy relationship is going to impact their children. And so the guides myth versus reality section, I'm hoping will provide comfort to some parents. And then I have some parents that come to me and say, like, I'm just so overwhelmed. I know I need to talk to my kids about this, but I don't even know where to start. And we created a great template for people to start conversation. There's actually scripts that people can go through. So if they're, in that state of overwhelm, it's a step-by-step process where they can take a lot of the mental work out of it for them. The feeling of uncertainty. So it's very common for people that I see to be unsure if abuse is even existing in their relationship. And the resource provides concise, accessible information to help gain awareness of potential dangerous blind spots in the relationship that they have, and then how they can move forward once that abuse is potentially named. And then lastly, doubt. So there's little information out there on the intersection between intimate partner violence and then the veteran family experience. And this highlights the unique aspect of military lifestyle that are not considered in the mainstream IPV information. And Ashlee touched on a few of these earlier, things like, and I talked about isolation, military culture, power imbalance. And that could look like things, if a family's moving every 2 to 3 years, the partner of the military member is then trying to move jobs every 2 to 3 years, and they might not be progressing in their career the way they would if they were staying in one place. And so oftentimes we see financial dependence on the military member, which can create a power imbalance in the relationship. And lastly, lots of the families I work with are impacted by post-traumatic stress disorder, and trying to discern the difference between PTSD and intimate partner violence. And we do have one section that outlines that beautifully, which I hope will be hopefully potentially reassuring for family members. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you, Kaitlyn and Petra, for sharing your thoughts on how they may be of value. Just before we wrap up, we also wanted to highlight some of our other resources, but we did want to share some of our own lessons learned from the project, because we've been reflecting a lot as we've kind of come to a close on that. And there's kind of 4 key lessons that we wanted to highlight. So the first was on was all kind of about adapting co-design processes and structures. So early on in our planning, we realized that we'd really have to adapt some of our usual co-design processes, given the sensitive and safety-related concerns associated with IPV, to really prioritize safety and inclusion, so that folks feel that they could really participate. And so, for example, we really placed clear limits on participation criteria just to make sure that folks were ready to engage in this type of work. We held informal coffee chats to check in with folks who are interested. And we also added little features into our engagement, like small group formats. We had check-ins and check-outs at the start and end of every meeting. We implemented web safety features, so things like an exit quickly button. We also had psychological supports available for folks before meetings, after meetings, for a period of time. And then we also had different options to participate, so folks didn't have to share their name if they weren't comfortable with that. They could join without video, with video, whatever they felt most comfortable, or just via email. So we wanted to make sure that we adapted those processes properly. The second lesson really pertains to the fact about that we reflected on how you present evidence really matters. And so our advisory really stressed the importance of including information, for example, about the relationship between PTSD and violence, given that this is often an area of concern in veteran families. And so in the content development phase, we recognize there's a lot of nuance within the research literature, and we really wanted to make sure that we discuss this link sensitively, but also in a non-stigmatizing way, because we recognize that not everyone with post-traumatic stress disorder is violent. That's not an automatic equation. And so this really meant adjusting our timelines to make sure that we had time to do a proper review of the literature, to make sure that we were getting insights and feedback from our advisory, from clinical expertise as well, so that we're framing the information properly. And essentially, if you do read the guide, it just says, yes, there is a relationship, but this doesn't mean that everyone with PTSD is violent. It just acknowledges that. Third, balancing lived and learned expertise perspectives. So we recognized early on that we really needed to ensure that there are some ground rules to ensure that both lived and professional or learned perspectives were equally valued and shared in the meetings. And so to help accomplish this, we first co-created the rules together with our advisory. So we spent one of our first meetings just going through with folks what they might like to see, what might help folks participate to their full capacity. And we also implemented tools like a modified nominal group technique. So basically, every person got an equal amount of time to speak. And then we also allocated time for people to kind of cross discuss, respond to what other people have said. And that really helped make the collaboration and discussion more balanced and collaborative in the end. And then last but not least, we kind of reflected on integrating considerations for diverse needs and audiences. So as you'll see in the guides, if you do read them, our advisory group really emphasized that they wanted the resources not only to speak to folks who are experiencing abuse, but also to those who may be using abusive behaviors. And so this really meant thinking about the content from both a prevention and a response lens. So to avoid stigmatizing language, using general terminology, ensuring that resources and information was appropriate for both audiences, just so that if someone were to pick up, for example, a resource, it might be helpful for them. Someone might be less likely to pick up a resource that says a guide for if you are using violence in your family, but if they pick up a guide that is generally about unhealthy relationships, maybe that information could get to them. So that was something that we reflected on. It was a really interesting process in terms of the actual content development. And maybe that's all I'll say about that. And go to the next slide. And just very briefly, we had some other relevant resources that we thought we could highlight for you all before we wrap up. So as mentioned, we have a few other resources on intimate partner violence on the Atlas website. So there is a couple resources there that highlight the findings of the research that Ashlee mentioned, as well as that curated list of support services that Robin had mentioned earlier on. We also have some resources on problematic anger, which are available to download. So we have tip sheets for download, as well as a course format for service providers for them to learn more about problematic anger. And then lastly, we have a suite of resources on military sexual trauma. And so there's a few practical guides specifically for veterans and family members, very similar to these IPV resources, as well as resources for service providers, including clinical practice guidelines, as well as short informative videos to help improve care. And I think that's it for me. I think I'll turn it over to Ashlee to close us up.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, and I just saw the prompt for questions go up. But in general, just to wrap up the content here, we invite you to visit the atlasveterans.ca website. Everything that we do and create is available free of charge. Of course, it's readily downloadable in English and in French from our website. If you're ever at a conference or event, we're physically in person, you're welcome to see if we have any copies of the resources on hand. Beyond that, we invite you to look out for future webinars on the topic. If you're interested in some of the topics that Victoria spoke about beyond IPV and a whole host of other topics as well, you're welcome to navigate our broader website, or also a great way to keep apprised of resources and research opportunities to join our network is by signing up for our newsletter. So if you navigate to our main page and scroll to the bottom, you'll see that there's a link to sign up for a newsletter. And if you have any questions or comments following today's presentation, you're welcome to get in touch. The email that's on the screen now is specifically for the knowledge mobilization team, who would be interested in hearing from you if there's anything you wanted to follow up with. The last slide there just shows you all of our contact details if you're interested in following us on various social media platforms. And yeah, with that, we'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar. And Jason, maybe I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of you for this excellent presentation. And it was very insightful and deeply grounded in lived experience. And for the AVA webinar audience, you've highlighted such important dimensions of IPV in veteran and military families. And I'm sure that I speak for all of the AVA webinar team and all of those in attendance that we've learned a great deal from your presentation. So thank you so much for this excellent presentation. And so, as I just posted in the chat just earlier, please post your questions in the Q&A section. And I've also posted the link to complete the webinar feedback survey, which I'll also be sending by email later today. I haven't seen any questions be posted in the Q&A, so I do have a few myself on the basis of your presentation. On the first one is that you mentioned that research on intimate partner violence within Canadian veteran families is quite limited. As I recall telling you, Robin, for example, when I first met with the Atlas team, that I told you about my past experience for a period of about 4.5 years as a program evaluator myself at the Care West Operational Stress Injury Clinic in Calgary. And as you're aware that I'm not a trained psychologist myself, but I was deeply involved in the program evaluation from about 2016 to 21 at the Care West OSI clinic, and I would agree with this overall sentiment from your presentation. And could you tell me specifically why this area has been historically unexplored and some future research objectives that you're hoping Atlas Institute could fulfill?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first go at that, but I'd welcome my co-presenters to chime in as well. I think there are a lot of barriers to accessing veteran families to understand their experience related to intimate partner violence. So we don't have in Canada dedicated health services, beyond what you mentioned, Jason, in terms of like operational stress injury clinics, et cetera. We don't have kind of, healthcare that's specific to veterans and veteran families. It's more they're, being seen in the general population. So to even collect this information to understand what are those percentages would be very difficult to do. So our best estimates are based on, other countries who have access to this data. But I do think it's an important area of research. I think when you look at a broad issue, it's very difficult to understand how to treat that issue without knowing kind of the specifics or the particularities that you're dealing with. So one of the studies that Atlas has underway right now is a qualitative study related to where people are accessing, related to accessing healthcare as veteran family members experiencing intimate partner violence. So we hope to be able to share that research soon. But beyond that, I think having a general sense of the understanding of the issue in Canada would be very important. But I'll just pause there and see if my co-presenters have anything they'd add to that.
Well, absolutely. Thank you for highlighting the research that Atlas is planning to fulfill with all of these, with this situation that you have described with respect to IPV research within Canadian veteran families being unexplored. And for those in attendance who are not aware that there is a network of operational stress injury clinics across Canada, something I personally didn't know myself until I started working at the Calgary clinic. I would have just assumed that those families who are experiencing IPV within the military, active or veterans, would have pursued mental health support within general outpatient or in some cases inpatient clinics. So it is, of course, beneficial that operational stress injury clinics across Canada do offer such specialized mental health support pursuant to IPV. And another question that emerged in my mind from your presentation is what are some of the unique cultural and organizational factors within military life that may heighten IPV risk or make it harder for people to seek help?
Yeah, great question. And I think, I spoke a bit about it in the beginning, and Kaitlyn did too. I think one thing that comes up a lot is the nature of being part of a military family means that you're probably relocating often. How are you able to kind of know where to access help or supports? You might be in a rural or remote context. And then the pieces related to chain of command that Kaitlyn mentioned, I think are all part of it. We also talked a little bit about hierarchies that are present in military culture, and how some of those some of what is part of the culture within the military might make its way into the family home. Kaitlyn also mentioned from a financial aspect that if the military member is relocating, oftentimes the spouse is maybe not able to advance their career in a way that they might like, or get the education that might enable them to become employed in a way that they can be financially stable on their own, which might mean that the military member has more access to the family's finances, which makes it very difficult for the individual to step outside of that, and especially if there's dependents involved, or pets, or what have you, that might cause or lead to additional barriers. With that, though, I'd again look to my co-presenters to see if they'd add anything to that.
Thank you so much for your valuable insight, Ashlee. And if there aren't comments from the other co-presenters in response to that question, then my second to last question focuses upon preventative strategies, which, as you're aware, in accordance with one of AVA's mandates, is to focus on prevention of intimate partner violence among high-risk groups. And specifically, and this is, of course, an important point that you mentioned within your presentation, and within this overarching context of IPV within military families, what do you believe prevention would look like in this context, and what's needed to undertake this shift?
Again, a great question, and I don't mean to hog all the answers. So again, I turn to my co-presenters, but I think understanding of what is a healthy relationship is so important, and I think these guides go into it a bit. I would also say that Military Family Services has created some really great resources related to healthy relationships, because I think there has to be kind of that baseline understanding of what is healthy, what is abuse, from a preventative aspect. And I also think there needs to be awareness, including in the military community, including in the Canadian Armed Forces, of what constitutes healthy relationships. I mean, maybe that's stepping outside of the bounds of what is taught within military service, but I think general kind of awareness and understanding of healthy relationships goes a long way in terms of prevention. Again, though, I'd invite any co-presenters if they have any additional thoughts.
Thanks, Ashlee. The only other thing that I would add is that from what I've seen is there's still quite a stigma attached to reaching out for help and for support. It's military communities can be a fishbowl community. Lots of people know other people's business, which really inhibits people from reaching out and saying something is wrong, something doesn't feel right, I need help. And as much as there's that support is mirrored in the civilian community, I do think, from my professional opinion, that it is, we're slightly behind in the military community, and it is getting a lot better. But I think the more people have access to information, such as these guides or the work that Atlas has done, the more people are going to be able to talk about what's going on. And if you can get buy-in from sort of those higher ranking individuals, those people in those positions of power within the military system, then it's going to start to reduce some of the stigma attached to bringing it up, reaching out and asking for help.
Absolutely.
I also kind of like to make a comment on that, because I'm also, even though I'm an advocate for IPV victims, and I hate using the word victims, but I'll just use it for the sake of this conversation. We also have to look at the perpetrators. And as far as I'm concerned, we really need to get to the root cause of why they're doing what they're doing. Why is, the behavior, where is it coming from? In a perfect world, I would love it when, these individuals enter the military right down to basic training, and there's mental health sort of supports and training right in boot camp. I think that would, in a perfect world. But yeah, I think we have to get to the root cause with the actual individuals as to why the behavior is the way it is, and kind of get it from there, and start working and understanding where it's all coming from. And then hopefully work with them to try to get the behavior to stop, to change. Because unless we do that, I don't think anything will change. I'm not sure if anything, these resources and getting the individuals out of the situations that they're in, but then that leaves the perpetrator to find another victim to carry on the behavior. We need to get to the root, work with them, get them to stop, get them to change, get them to heal from whatever it is that they're dealing with mentally. And then hopefully maybe we can start chipping away at this pandemic, because domestic violence is a pandemic. It's out of control. So that's just my sort of thoughts on it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, all of you, for your valuable insight in response to preventative strategies against IPV within military families. And I'd like, as the final question, to preface by thanking you for your excellent work that you've undertaken with respect to researching IPV in military families, and also assisting with the provision of services. And if you had to identify one impact that you're most proud of upon reflecting on the co-design journey and the resources now available, what would it be? Now, or to correct myself, you aren't limited to just one, but what would be some of the most notable impacts that you can envision?
That's a hard one, Jason. But I'm happy to kick off and maybe say, on a personal note, I think that I'm most proud. I mean, it's really lovely to get to give back to a community that I am and was a part of growing up in a military family, but more specifically to have been able to work for an organization that gave us the time and the space and the tools to create, like Petra said, a safe place for people with lived and living experience on this issue to help us do the work, because we wouldn't have been able to do it without the input of Petra's lived experience, others around the table, and Kaitlyn's professional experience. But we also wouldn't have been able to do that if we weren't given the tools and resources from Atlas. So I'd say that's what I'm most proud of.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Robin. And thanks for highlighting some of the most important impacts that characterize the Atlas Institute's valuable work. If there aren't any other questions or any other responses, then I'd like to conclude by thanking you for such an excellent, thoughtful presentation. And I believe that your presentation offered valuable insights into both the challenges and the progress being made in supporting veterans and their families. And thank you for the excellent work that you undertake and the valuable and informative presentation that you have delivered as part of AVA Webinar Wednesdays as part of this series. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.